And hello everybody, this is Doc, and we have a screencast for our next lesson, which will be running Wednesday and Thursday, December 12th and December 3rd. There will be vocabulary and questions which are listed in Google Classroom for you to work on. And this is basically an overview of the lesson, the reading part. What we'll be talking about is we'll be looking at the domestic and foreign policies of Napoleon III, who we mentioned earlier about 2 weeks ago. We'll talk about the challenges and political reforms of the Third Republic, which was contentious, and then how the Dreyfus Affair divided France and contributed to the growth of the Zionist movement, and I'm going to add anti-Semitism in France and Europe. You have a smaller vocabulary list. There are only about 7 words, and you'll need to go ahead and click right here for them, or you can go through the reading. You are expected to read the textbook. So here we have a picture of Napoleon III, or representing him, and he stands, it represents him, and this is where he led French forces into the Battle of Solferino during the Second Italian War for Independence. Napoleon was very inclined to use military force. He wanted to basically establish the same type of power that Napoleon had, his uncle. He just wasn't as good a general. And his military ventures were costly and not very successful. And you're going to find that this is a situation in France where it's trying to get back to where it was in the earlier parts of the 19th century, after the Revolution and during the age of Napoleon. But after Napoleon, you know that they did bring the Bourbonnais kings, who reinstated a monarchy. It was more of a constitutional monarchy, and there was a large period of strife and disruption in France. France was constantly having insurgencies, mini revolutions. People would throw up barricades in the streets and basically fight against the government, and it was a period of crisis after crisis. Although France was moving forward with some good democratic reforms, most importantly extending suffrage to more people, this would be a common scene. What would happen is people would be angry, and they would throw up barricades in the city streets, and Paris became a hotbed. There were hundreds of these little rebellions taking place in Paris and France, and basically the conflict was between those who wanted the royalist type of approach, a constitutional monarchy, which had been basically destroyed during the French Revolution, and those who were the communards, who were the pre-runners in many ways of communism, and they would erect barricades as they were opposed to the monarchy, and they wanted a much more radical reform. France was very divided. You had what you had on the hard left side of France, and it looks like you're right, but it's my left. You had radical people. These people were basically wanted to rule by brute force over the people, but their agenda was very different than those who were on more the right side. These would be the Girondists on the right and the Jacobins, to go back to the revolutionary times. There was very little center, and there were factions. You had hard right, hard left, hard right, and then you'd have some more in the moderate, but very few who shared ground. And so what happened is governments needed help. It wasn't two systems that you could usually get a majority. So there would be times where the left would work with the mid-left, the right would work with the mid-right, and sometimes, very rarely, the center would work together, but that would really upset people on the extremes who were more inclined to action, including rebellion. This is called a coalition government. Basically, different groups, multiple parties, would have to cobble together to get a majority. They'd have to band together with groups that they found common grounds with. It made the stability in France shaky. And what happened was the Senate, the president had the little power. He's called a premier, and it was mostly a figurehead. The power was in the National Assembly, but again, it was split between at least 4 factions and sometimes more. There were sometimes up to 8, 9 parties in the elections, and it would cause a problem. So again, the term coalition right here, or alliances of various parties. Once a coalition would get control, they would name a premier, and form a cabinet. And it was the cabinet that made most of the decisions, with the premier being more of a figurehead. This is still common today in Europe. You have coalition governments when you don't have a clear majority. And what happens is usually it's the far left and the far right of a country that's driving the agenda, and people who accept parts of it but not all tend to go more toward the center. And then you might have various fringe parties that make up little bits of the population. This is why sometimes you have in Europe so many overthrows of governments. You'll hear a coalition government has emerged or a coalition government has fallen apart, because these alliances are very temporary. And this leads to a country not having a clear direction and having to change directions many times. But it works for that. So might work for them, because there are benefits to having a coalition government, because it does make compromise, and also compromise on issues that may not bring together various parts of the spectrum in politics. So it's just a different way of doing things. The other problem that was happening in France was that you had multiple scandals. The most infamous was the Dreyfus affair, which we'll talk about in detail in a little bit. This is a picture of a leader by the name of Boulanger, and he was a very successful general, and he was a royalist, and they actually wanted to make him emperor. And he's leading the parade. He's you can see by the political cartoon, he's kind of full of himself. But and look at the people who are supporting him. They're all male, because only males have the right to vote. And the question you need to ask yourself, what social class, economic class, do these people come from? Some look very wealthy, and all look pretty comfortable. So he was supported by large segments of the center-right bourgeoisie and the more conservative members who wanted the aristocracy, who wanted a monarchy established or a constitutional monarchy established. And you can read about the Boulanger affair in the cartoon. It didn't go very well. Boulanger was a good military leader, but he was not a good leader. He was a little bit full of himself, and he had to flee. He basically had to flee the country, and he was so upset about it that he ended his life. An even more disturbing conflict, as we mentioned, was the Dreyfus affair, where a French army officer was basically accused of espionage. He was a high-ranking, well-decorated army officer, but he was not well liked by the military establishment for one main reason. Even though he was a very competent and successful officer, he was Jewish. And the Dreyfus affair showed a new aspect that was developing not only in France but in all of Europe at this time of anti-Semitism, which was a deep dislike for Jewish people. Dreyfus is found guilty by a bad court. They just had it in for this guy, and part of it was political. The idea was that in the government they did not want high-ranking people who were Jewish in the French government and the French military. He's sent to Devil's Island. He's sentenced and tried for treason. He's sentenced to Devil's Island, but what happens, evidence emerges, and the decision is reversed. He is found not guilty. And he does manage to get out of Devil's Island, but the Dreyfus affair led to a number of other people being tried, and people who unveiled the conspiracy to get rid of Dreyfus, they were attacked and they were jailed. Then the people who prosecuted who prosecuted the Dreyfus affair went after. But anti-Semitism was so strong, especially in the military and in high ranks of French society. And it was not just in France, it was all through Europe at this time. And it only gets worse as the 19th century goes on and into the 20th century, and leads eventually to one nation developing such overt policies of anti-Semitism that it leads to 6 million people being put into concentration camps and killed. But throughout Europe, the people who killed those people had a lot of help from many people. When you have in Poland, as an example, 99.6% of the Jewish population was killed by the Nazis. They had a lot of help among the Polish people, who had an unbelievable and a distinct hatred of Jewish people. This led many Jewish people to believe that they would never be able to find a way of life within Europe or within the other world, and led for the movement called Zionism, which was the establishment of a Jewish homeland in its traditional historic region, the Middle East, which is what we have today. And it still causes some great contention. But Zionism, again, is the idea devoted to building a Jewish state in the Jewish homeland. After Judaism had been basically, and the Jewish state had been destroyed by the Romans around 70 AD. Well, this started happening, and in 1948, the nation of Israel was founded. There were some reforms that went on. Again, there are 50 or so known barricades being thrown up, and the Constitution of the Third Republic was amended 50 times and sometimes totally rewritten. There were some good reforms. Healthcare was greatly improved, and it became more of a public healthcare. Public schools were created, and basically that was partly to wrest some of the control solely from the Catholic Church, so that you had an option. There was a separation of church and state. Now, the United States has a non-establishment clause, and the idea is that the church and state are kind of on different roads, and the government can't establish or abolish a religion. The French puts up a real wall of church involvement. It's much stronger than that constitutionally found in the United States. Women's rights did increase, and it was partly because Napoleon had basically gotten rid of that part of the revolution. But even as the United States and Great Britain moved towards suffrage in the 19th century, eventually in the early 20th century granting women's rights, it's not until 1946 that French women get the right to vote. Women, as late as 1896, could not legally keep the money that they earned working a job. It belonged to the husband. So things that today we would look at and say, how can this even exist, were existing. And so progress is being made, and in some cases very, very good progress, in some cases not very fast. And today we look back and say, how is this even possible? So the Franco-Prussian War, I did not talk about that. This is very important. I do need to address it, so I'm going to go back. The Franco-Prussian War was when Prussia became very militaristic, and they started flexing their muscles, and they wanted back territory that Napoleon had grabbed from them 50 years earlier. They were successful in attacking France and basically dictating the terms. What they did is they invaded and they surrounded Paris, and Paris had to surrender. France had lost its biggest city, and so what they had to do is they basically had to accept the terms that Prussia laid on them without any precondition. And a big part of that return was large segments of the of French territory in Alsace and Lorraine were handed back to the Germans. And this established Germany as a national power. And part of this is because of the weak policy of Napoleon III. Napoleon III got involved in foreign wars, and he was not watching his own home. He limited liberties. The people who welcomed him at first started to really see him as a tyrant, and he almost became like an emperor, but he wasn't. Napoleon I was an emperor, but at least he was effective, at least in civil affairs. Napoleon III was horrible. His foreign affairs were the worst part. He started a war in Italy that gave France nothing, really. It gave them 2 small territories that they lost when Italy became a unified country, and it cost a great amount of treasure. He got involved in a gambit in Mexico to try to establish a French empire in Mexico. That didn't work. It weakened the French military, and it also led to the Franco-Prussian War, which was a disaster for France. Napoleon is forced to surrender to the Germans. It ends the Second Empire. Paris is under siege. It got so bad in Paris that people were eating rats and eating circus animals for their food. Thousands of people died of starvation. The Franco-Prussian War basically ends the period where France dominates Europe. France will no longer be the major player. But what does happen out of the Franco-Prussian War is that government does improve a bit, and people who want to restore the glory of the Napoleonic era, where France is the top dog in Europe, gain power, and they are constantly pushing ultra-nationalism including the idea of anti-Semitism. That's all for today. Thank you.